Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
All right, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into one of the most laughable political blame games in recent memory. And that's saying something, because the competition is fierce. We're talking about the media meltdown over Kamala Harris's crushing loss to Donald Trump. But more specifically, the excuse factory over at MSNBC, pumping out talking points like they're on to PWI now. You'd think they'd have moved on. At the very least, you'd think they'd swap out the tired "it's sexism, it's racism" card for something halfway original. But nope, same playbook. Same recycled lines, just dust it off and reheat it for the occasion. It's predictable.
But you're either the person who's Googling the day before, did Biden drop out, or in a week. Huh? Did anyone in this audience not know enough about Kamala Harris pretty much after a week to make a decision?
It's stale, and it's not fooling anyone anymore. And that's where Bill Maher stepped in, swinging a sledgehammer straight through this pity parade. No sugarcoating, no polite nodding along, just brutal honesty. And honestly, I'm here for it. Because when even a lifelong liberal like Maher calls out the nonsense, you know the spin cycle is officially broken. So let's rewind a bit. All week long, pundits have been on air insisting that Harris's campaign was flawless. Flawless? Seriously? That's like saying
it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
New Coke was a flawless product launch, or that Cats, yes, the nightmare fuel of the movie was flawless filmmaking. Let's be real, this wasn't flawless. This wasn't even in the neighborhood of flawless. And when that argument started collapsing under its own weight, the backup excuses rolled in. The usual suspects: sexism, racism, voter ignorance. Lather, rinse, repeat. Same excuses, different election cycle. But here's the thing, America is perfectly capable of electing a woman.
But the Vice President of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that in a mass media age, that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody.
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what they.
No.
You have someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
That's not the problem. The problem is we keep getting the wrong women pushed to the front. That's not misogyny. That's just called not being impressed. And guess what? That's allowed. Not every rejection is some grand act of oppression. Sometimes, people just don't like the product you're selling. Period. Now here's where it gets spicy. Maher points out that Kamala spent 3.5 years basically shoved into a political broom closet. She was so invisible, her approval rating probably went up just because people forgot she existed. Out of sight, out of mind, literally. And then, with only 107 days left before the election, she's suddenly thrust onto center stage as the face of the Democratic ticket. Some pundits tried to spin it as, well, that's just not enough time for America to really get to know her. Please, America had more than enough time. They just weren't buying what she was selling. Oh, please, this isn't the 1800s. We live in an era where Donald Trump can dominate the national conversation for 8 straight years, half the time without even trying. You think Americans need a full decade to form an opinion on someone?
All right, do the Democrats need a social media platform, this is for you, John, of their own to combat the Republican influence on Twitter? Well, I don't know, but Twitter, it's funny. It used to be completely left. Then Elon said, I'm going to take it over, so it's going to be 50-50 right down the middle. He didn't do that. It just switched completely. So I don't know. It's terrible that I think that we have our own media silos. We need places where, like this show, but there's not enough of them, where everybody comes and everybody hears everybody else from all points of view.
They didn't need that for Trump. They didn't need it for Obama. And they sure as hell didn't need it for Kamala.MSNBC, and their friends in the media bubble don't want to admit it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. People already did know her. They just didn't like her. Period. End of story. And instead of owning that reality, the media ran cover, pretending it was some tragic case of not enough time. Now let's talk about the media silos Maher brought up, because this is where it gets telling. He's dead on. The right has its own echo chambers now, sure. But the concept didn't start on the right. It was born the moment the left locked down legacy media, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and wielded it like a political shield. Bad stories about Democrats, spiked. Embarrassing moments, edited out. Opponents, turned into cartoon villains on a 24/7 loop. For years, Trump was a punching bag. Every headline, every cycle. Meanwhile, Democrats got the soft lighting, the gentle piano music, and interview questions that sounded like they were ripped from a Hallmark card. That's not journalism. That's PR. And people caught on. That's why millions of people ditched the networks and tuned into independent voices instead. Podcasters like Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, Patrick Bet-David, and a whole lineup of unpolished but unfiltered creators who weren't afraid to break the narrative wide open. They didn't pretend to be neutral. They didn't put on the anchor voice or hide behind fake objectivity. But at least they weren't running every story through a partisan fog machine. That honesty, messy as it was, felt refreshing, and the results? Wild. Those platforms ended up shaping the election conversation more than ABC, NBC, CNN, and MSNBC combined. Think about that. The left controlled everything. The networks, the op-eds, the big blue check marks on Twitter before Elon showed up. They had the headlines, the late-night hosts, the newsrooms, even the fact-checkers in their corner. Yet they still got outmaneuvered by a bunch of bro-friendly podcasts recorded in garages. That's not just ironic, that's embarrassing. And here's the kicker. When people pointed to those alternative platforms, the same media elites who once worshipped Twitter suddenly declared it not real life. Convenient. Twitter was real enough when it was banning stories about Hunter Biden's laptop, throttling conservative accounts, and running interference for Democrats. But the second Elon Musk unlocked the doors, suddenly it's a toxic cesspool. That doesn't matter. That's not analysis. That's sore loser syndrome. You can see it in the language too. Whenever the conversation drifts toward admitting bias, the pundits get squeamish. They wrap half-truths and euphemisms, tiptoe around obvious realities, and speak like they're barefoot walking across Lego pieces. Pain all over their faces, but determined to make it to the other side without admitting the obvious. The media's credibility collapsed, and people noticed. Then came the economy excuse. Oh, this one was rich. John Heilman went on TV claiming that voters' frustration with the economy was mostly perception, as in, people didn't really have it that bad. They just thought they did. Really? Tell that to the family whose grocery bill doubled in 2 years. Tell it to the small business owners suffocating under rent hikes and utilities. Tell it to anyone who's filled their gas tank since Biden took office. That wasn't perception. That was reality hitting people straight in the wallet. Gas prices through the roof. Mortgage rates over 7%. Wages flat while food, energy, and housing kept climbing. You didn't need a pollster to explain it. You just needed to look at your fridge and see what wasn't there. And yet, the pundits insisted voters were just confused. As if Americans can't tell the difference between inflation on paper and inflation in real life. Now, here's where it gets insulting. When Heilman suggested that 107 days wasn't enough time for America to get to know Kamala Harris, what he was really saying was, you're too dumb to figure this stuff out quickly. Wrong. Americans didn't reject Kamala because they didn't know her. They rejected her because they did. They saw the awkward cackles, the circular word salads, the inability to land a clear, confident point. You don't need a decade-long campaign to figure out whether that inspires confidence. Most people made up their mind within the first week. And Ma, to his credit, pushed back hard. He said, look, other countries run their elections in weeks. They don't need years of campaign theater to size up a candidate, and neither do we. Exactly. The only people who believe America needs 3 years of town halls and staged interviews are the consultants who get paid by the hour. Voters? They already knew Kamala Harris. They just didn't like what they saw. Period. Which brings us a final excuse, the mythical late deciders. Heilman compared them to Christmas Eve shoppers, wandering the aisles at the last minute, still unsure. But here's the thing, last-minute voters aren't clueless. They're cautious. They wait to see who closes strongest. And when Kamala's closing pitch flopped, it wasn't because they ran out of time. It was because she had nothing to say, so we end up back where we started. The media can spin this however they want. Flawless campaign, unfair sexism, bad timing, late deciders. But the bottom line is brutally simple. Voters saw Kamala Harris, heard her message, and decided she wasn't it. That's not misogyny. That's not ignorance. That's democracy. And until Democrats stop blaming voters and start actually listening to them, they're going to keep losing and blaming it on everything but themselves. So here's the question. Was this really about timing, or are Democrats just allergic to accountability? Drop your thoughts below. Smash that like button if you're tired of political excuses, and subscribe. Because next time, we're diving into why the media is more terrified of losing control of the narrative than they are of losing elections. And trust me, that's where it gets really messy.